The hidden truth about Jehovah's Witnesses. That nobody tells you Jehovah's Witnesses are one of the most enigmatic and debated religious communities in the world. With millions of followers in more than 240 countries, their impact is undeniable. But what lies behind their beliefs and practices? Why does their doctrine generate such fervor among their followers, while at the same time causing so much rejection among those who have decided to leave the organization? In this video, we will explore the truths that few dare to reveal about Jehovah's Witnesses. From their rigid organizational structure to their strict codes of conduct, including the controversial prohibition of blood transfusions and the contentious practice of disfellowshipping, we will uncover aspects that have sparked debates and complaints worldwide. Stay until the end, because what you will discover here may completely change your perception of this religious community. And before we continue, tell me, what do you think about organizations that require the isolation of former members? Leave your comment and don't forget to subscribe to Viaje Divino. Give this video a like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss more content like this. Jehovah's Witnesses are a community distinguished by their doctrinal firmness and highly structured way of life. Their presence in society does not go unnoticed. They are known for their door-to-door evangelizing efforts, their rejection of blood transfusions, and their apocalyptic worldview. However, few understand the magnitude of their internal structure, the control over their members, and the consequences faced by those who decide to leave the organization. To understand the influence of this community, it is essential to know its origins. Jehovah's Witnesses emerged in the late 19th century in the United States under the leadership of Charles Taze Russell, a man deeply interested in the interpretation of the scriptures. Russell established a Bible study group that later evolved into what we now know as Jehovah's Witnesses. From the beginning, their movement was characterized by a vision of Christianity distinct from traditional teachings. They rejected the Trinity, denied the existence of hell as a place of eternal torment, and proclaimed that the end of the world was near. One of the most striking aspects of Jehovah's Witnesses is their belief in the imminence of Armageddon. According to their doctrine, the current world is dominated by Satan, and only Jehovah's faithful followers will survive when the end times arrive. This conviction has shaped the lives of their members for decades. They have predicted the end of the world on multiple occasions, with the most notable dates being 1914, 1925, and 1975. Each time one of these predictions failed, the organization reinterpreted events, claiming that Armageddon had begun invisibly or that a miscalculation had simply been made. The emphasis on the proximity of the end of the world has had a profound impact on the daily lives of Jehovah's Witnesses. The organization discourages its members from making long-term plans outside the community, such as obtaining higher education or accumulating wealth, as the priority must always be the work of evangelization. This mentality has led many to sacrifice personal opportunities, convinced that time in this system of things is limited and that Jehovah will soon establish his kingdom on earth. However, beyond their theological beliefs, what has generated the most controversy are their strict rules of conduct and the level of control they exert over their members. The organization, led by a governing body based in Warwick, New York, establishes detailed regulations governing almost every aspect of a Jehovah's Witness's life. These rules cover everything from dress codes to permitted entertainment activities. Witnesses are prohibited from celebrating birthdays, Christmas, and other holidays deemed pagan. They must also avoid music, movies, and literature that could be considered immoral or that promote values contrary to those of the organization. One of the most sensitive topics is their absolute rejection of blood transfusions. Based on interpretations of Bible verses such as Leviticus 17:10-14 and Acts 15:29, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that receiving blood, even in life or death situations, is an act forbidden by God. This has led to multiple cases of preventable deaths, especially of children whose parents refuse to allow transfusions. Although the organization promotes bloodless medical alternatives, the refusal to receive such treatment has been the subject of intense ethical and legal debates in various countries. Another aspect that has generated strong criticism is the practice of disfellowshipping, also known as expulsion or shunning. When a Jehovah's Witness violates the organization's rules or voluntarily decides to leave the faith, they are subjected to a severe punishment. All contact with them is severed. Members of the community, including close family members and lifelong friends, are prohibited from speaking to them. For many former members, this experience is devastating. Parents stop talking to their children, siblings ignore each other, and marriages dissolve as a result of this policy. The organization's argument is that this practice is necessary to maintain spiritual purity and protect the community from negative influences. However, psychologists and experts in cults have pointed out that shunning is an extreme form of social control that causes deep emotional trauma for those who experience it. Loneliness, depression, and, in some cases, suicide are among the consequences faced by disfellowshipped individuals. Over the years, Jehovah's Witnesses have also been the subject of serious allegations regarding the cover-up of abuse within the organization. In various countries, investigations have revealed that cases of child abuse have been handled internally without being reported to the authorities. The organization's internal policy requires the presence of 2 witnesses for an abuse allegation to be considered valid, which in most cases makes it impossible for victims to obtain justice. Restrictions on higher education are also a topic of debate. Although attending university is not explicitly prohibited, the organization discourages its members from pursuing higher studies. In their publications and speeches, they warn that university education exposes young people to worldly influences and promotes a lifestyle focused on personal success rather than devotion to Jehovah. As a result, many Jehovah's Witnesses limit their education to manual or technical jobs, which can affect their career opportunities and financial independence. Despite all these controversies, it is undeniable that Jehovah's Witnesses maintain a united and organized community. Their members find a strong sense of belonging and mutual support within the congregation. They are known for their discipline, work ethic, and dedication to evangelization. For them, following the rules established by the governing body is not an imposition, but a demonstration of loyalty and faith. The question that then arises is, what leads a person to become a Jehovah's Witness, and what happens when they decide to leave? Many people join the organization in search of spiritual answers, stability, and a sense of purpose in life. However, once inside, they discover that their freedom of thought and decision-making is limited by a highly hierarchical system that does not allow questioning. Leaving the organization is not an easy decision. Most former members face the fear of isolation, the loss of their loved ones, and the difficulty of reintegrating into society after spending years or even their entire lives within the community. Some successfully rebuild their lives, while others remain trapped in a limbo of guilt and confusion. What is clear is that Jehovah's Witnesses are a community that generates both admiration and controversy. For some, they are an example of faith and devotion. For others, they represent an oppressive system that limits individual freedom. But this is just the beginning. There are still many truths to be revealed about this organization and its impact on the lives of millions of people. Jehovah's Witnesses have built a system based on absolute obedience to the organization. To understand their internal structure, it is essential to analyze how their congregations are organized, how their hierarchy functions, and what role the governing body, the group of men who set the rules for the entire community, plays. The governing body is the highest authority within Jehovah's Witnesses. It is composed of a small number of elders who reside at the world headquarters in Warwick, New York. They present themselves as the only legitimate interpreters of God's will on earth, granting them absolute power over millions of followers worldwide. Every decision they make, every rule they establish, is considered as if it came directly from Jehovah, meaning that any disagreement or criticism is seen as a rebellion against God himself. The organization's control over its members extends to the most intimate aspects of personal life. Not only do they regulate dress, music, and entertainment, but they also oversee the type of friendships believers can have and what kind of information they can consume. One of the strictest rules is to avoid any material critical of the organization. Jehovah's Witnesses are constantly warned about the danger of reading books, watching documentaries, or even listening to testimonies from former members, as they are told that these sources are influenced by Satan and seek to lead them away from the truth. Surveillance within the community is strict. Each congregation has a group of elders who act as overseers, ensuring that all members comply with the rules. If a Jehovah's Witness is caught violating a rule, whether by attending a prohibited celebration, watching an inappropriate movie, or even maintaining friendships outside the organization, they may be summoned to a judicial committee. These committees are composed of a group of elders who interrogate the accused in a private and closed process where the presence of lawyers or external witnesses is not allowed. Depending on the offense committed, penalties may vary. In some cases, the accused is reprimanded and required to show repentance. But if the sin is considered serious, or if the person does not display the expected level of remorse, they may be disfellowshipped. Disfellowshipping is, in essence, a total sentence of ostracism. All members of the community, including close family and friends, must cut off all contact with the disfellowshipped individual. This practice has been one of the most criticized in society. Former members often describe disfellowshipping as a form of social death, as they instantly lose their entire support network. There are countless stories of parents who stop talking to their children, siblings who completely ignore each other, and marriages that end in divorce after one spouse is expelled. The organization justifies this measure as a way to protect the community from negative influences and to motivate the disfellowshipped person to repent and return to the faith. However, studies have shown that the psychological impact of this practice can be devastating. Former members have reported symptoms of depression, anxiety, and, in extreme cases, suicidal thoughts due to the feeling of total isolation. Most of them grew up in an environment where they were taught that there is nothing good outside the organization, so when they are expelled, they face an unfamiliar world without the preparation or tools necessary to adapt. In addition to disfellowshipping, Jehovah's Witnesses have another form of social exclusion that is less drastic but equally damaging: marking. When a member is considered a bad influence but has not committed a sin serious enough to be expelled, they are marked within the congregation. Although contact is not completely severed, other members are warned that they should avoid the company of that person and limit their interactions with them. This practice creates an atmosphere of fear and control, where members fear being marginalized if they do not behave according to the established rules. Another controversial aspect of the organization is its policy on handling abuse allegations. In several countries, investigations have revealed that Jehovah's Witnesses handle cases of child abuse internally without reporting them to civil authorities. This is due to their two-witness rule, which states that a sin can only be investigated if there are at least two eyewitnesses to confirm it. In most cases of abuse, There are no additional witnesses, meaning that many reports go without consequences within the organization. In countries such as Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, government investigations have been conducted into how the organization handles these cases. In Australia, the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse revealed that Jehovah's Witnesses had documented more than 1,000 cases of abuse over the past 50 years, none of which had been reported to the police. This has led to lawsuits and legal sanctions against the organization, but their stance remains the same. Internal issues should be resolved within the community and not involve worldly entities. In addition to these scandals, there are other restrictions within the community that affect the daily lives of Jehovah's Witnesses. One of them is their negative view of higher education. Although they do not outright ban young people from attending university, the organization constantly discourages this option, warning that secular education can lead them away from the faith and expose them to negative influences. They promote the idea that instead of pursuing academic degrees, believers should focus on jobs that allow them more time to preach and serve in the congregation. This has had a significant impact on the job opportunities of Jehovah's Witnesses. Many grow up believing that higher education is unnecessary, which limits their access to better jobs and financial stability. Former members have shared that, after leaving the organization, they find themselves in precarious situations because they were never encouraged or prepared to develop a career outside the community. Another important point is the way Jehovah's Witnesses view relationships and marriage. In their doctrine, marriage is a sacred union that should only take place between members of the same faith. Marrying someone outside the organization is discouraged, and in some cases may even lead to disfellowshipping if it is considered that the person is prioritizing their personal desires over their loyalty to Jehovah. The rules on marriage and family life are strict. It is taught that the husband is the head of the family and that the wife must submit to his authority, following a hierarchical model based on their interpretation of the Bible. Additionally, divorce is only permitted in cases of adultery. If a person wishes to separate for any other reason, the congregation will pressure them to remain in the marriage, even if there is emotional abuse or irreconcilable incompatibility. Within this structure, the role of women is particularly limited. They are not allowed to hold leadership positions within the congregation, nor can they lead prayers in the presence of men. Although they can participate in evangelizing work and teaching activities, their authority is always subordinate to that of men within the organization. Despite these restrictions, Jehovah's Witnesses maintain an image of a strong and united community. For those inside, the congregation represents a safe refuge in a world they consider corrupt and in decline. However, the price of belonging to this group is high. The renunciation of individuality, the restriction of personal freedoms, and the unconditional acceptance of a system that does not allow questioning. But there is still more to discover about the influence of this organization and the stories of those who managed to leave it. Over the years, Jehovah's Witnesses have built a system based on obedience and strict discipline. For members of the organization, this framework of rules is seen as a way to remain spiritually pure and in harmony with Jehovah's will. However, for those outside, or those who have been expelled, these rules may be perceived as a form of control that limits individual freedom and the ability to question. One of the most important pillars of their structure is door-to-door preaching. This method is one of the most characteristic activities of Jehovah's Witnesses and is based on their interpretation of Matthew 24:14, which states, "And this good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations." Following this premise, Jehovah's Witnesses devote a significant amount of their time to visiting homes with the purpose of spreading their message. What few people know is that this activity is not optional. From the moment a person is baptized as a Jehovah's Witness, they are required to actively participate in preaching. Each member must record the time they dedicate to this work and submit monthly reports to the congregation elders. Those who do not meet these expectations may be seen as spiritually weak, and in some cases are reprimanded or pressured to increase their commitment to the organization. For many followers, preaching is a heavy burden. It is common for them to face rejection, insults, or even threats when knocking on doors, which has a significant psychological impact, especially on children and teenagers who are forced to participate. However, the organization teaches that this sacrifice is necessary to demonstrate loyalty to Jehovah, and that any suffering they experience is a test of their faith. The concept of sacrifice is central to the doctrine of Jehovah's Witnesses. They are instilled with the idea that they must put Jehovah and the organization above everything, even their own personal aspirations. As a result, many members sacrifice job opportunities, relationships with non-believing family members, and even their health, all in the name of obedience. A clear example of this is the practice of rejecting blood transfusions. As previously mentioned, Jehovah's Witnesses interpret Leviticus 17:10-14 and Acts 15:29 as a complete prohibition against the use of blood, even in critical medical situations. This belief has led to thousands of deaths among Jehovah's Witnesses who refuse transfusions, and although the organization promotes alternative treatments, in many cases, the lack of blood has been the decisive factor between life and death. Hospitals in some countries have developed special protocols to treat Jehovah's Witness patients without transfusions, but these methods are not always effective in emergency situations. There are testimonies from former members who recount how they were pressured to sign documents rejecting blood transfusions before undergoing surgery, even if their lives were at risk. Beyond the issue of blood, Jehovah's Witnesses also have a firm stance against certain medical practices. The organization has expressed doubts about some psychiatric treatments, discouraging the use of medication for anxiety and depression, and instead suggesting that members pray and read the Bible for comfort. Although they do not explicitly prohibit seeking psychological assistance, many Jehovah's Witnesses believe that turning to therapy is a sign of a lack of faith in Jehovah. The pressure to remain spiritually strong can be overwhelming. The organization enforces a highly regulated lifestyle where any deviation from the rules can lead to social sanctions. From the music they listen to the clothes they wear, everything is carefully monitored. Clothing must be modest, meaning that women cannot wear provocative outfits, and men must maintain a neat and conservative appearance. Romantic relationships are also strictly controlled. Jehovah's Witnesses can only marry other members of the organization, and dating must be conducted under congregation supervision. Long courtships are discouraged, and early marriage is promoted, since it is believed that getting married quickly is better than falling into temptation. Within marriage, the rules are equally strict. The wife must submit to her husband's authority, as it is considered that he is the head of the family, according to their interpretation of Ephesians 5:22-24. Although the organization does not openly support domestic abuse, in many cases, women are advised to remain with their husbands, even if they are in toxic or abusive relationships. Divorce is only permitted in cases of adultery, meaning that any other reason, including emotional or physical abuse, is not considered a valid reason to separate. Many women who have tried to leave unhappy marriages have faced rejection from the congregation and have been viewed as rebellious for not fulfilling their duty as wives. Another highly controversial point is the way the organization treats young people. Children who grow up as Jehovah's Witnesses experience a childhood vastly different from that of other children. From an early age, they are taught that the outside world is dangerous and that true happiness can only be found within the congregation. They are prohibited from participating in celebrations such as birthdays, Christmas, and Halloween, which makes them feel excluded at school. They cannot participate in extracurricular activities such as sports teams or school clubs, as the organization believes that these activities expose them to bad influences. And as they grow older, young Jehovah's Witnesses face immense pressure to get baptized and fully commit to the organization. However, once they are baptized, any wrongdoing they commit is treated with the same severity as it is for adults. This means that if a 15 or 16-year-old commits a serious sin, such as dating someone outside the congregation or expressing doubts about the doctrine, they can be disfellowshipped and lose all contact with their family and friends. It's no surprise that many young people who leave the organization report symptoms of post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and depression. The transition to the outside world can be terrifying, as they have been taught throughout their lives that outside the congregation they will only find suffering and despair. Despite all these restrictions, Jehovah's Witnesses continue to grow in many parts of the world. Their success lies in the highly organized structure of the community and their ability to provide a strong sense of belonging. For many, being a Jehovah's Witness represents stability, purpose, and the promise of a better future in the new world they expect after Armageddon. However, the question remains: can this organization truly be considered just a religious group, or are we looking at a system of control that limits its members' freedom? Leaving Jehovah's Witnesses is not a simple process. For many, the organization is not just a faith, but a way of life that shapes every aspect of their existence. Abandoning it means facing an unknown world, the loss of family and friends, and, in many cases, an identity crisis. Most former members describe their departure as a traumatic experience. Often, it is not just a spiritual decision, but a matter of emotional and mental survival. Many witnesses begin to question the organization when they notice contradictions in doctrine, suffer injustices within the congregation, or are forced to choose between their beliefs and their well-being. One of the most common testimonies among former members is the moment when they realize that their world is based on fear. From a young age, they are taught that life outside the organization is dangerous, that apostates are agents of Satan, and that anyone who criticizes the doctrine is condemned to destruction in Armageddon. This indoctrination causes many to remain in the organization not out of conviction, but out of fear of the consequences of leaving. For some, leaving begins with simple questions. Why have the prophecies about the end of the world never been fulfilled? Why is the organization so obsessed with controlling its members' lives? Why is leaving punished so severely? These questions lead to an internal crisis that can last for years. Many Jehovah's Witnesses, even after beginning to doubt, remain in the organization out of fear of isolation. They know that if they choose to leave, they will lose all contact with their family and friends. The process of leaving can take different forms. Some decide to distance themselves gradually, stopping attendance at meetings and avoiding involvement in congregation activities. However, this approach may not be enough. The organization considers that anyone who abandons the faith should be avoided, even if they have not committed a serious offense. Others opt for a more direct exit, writing a letter of resignation and sending it to the elders. This option, although quicker, has immediate consequences. From the moment the letter is accepted, the individual is considered disassociated, meaning that no Jehovah's Witness can speak to them or even acknowledge their existence. The stories of those who have been disassociated are heartbreaking. Some recount how their own parents asked them to leave their home overnight. Siblings who grew up together stop speaking to each other. Children never hear their mother's voices again. One former member shared their experience. "I remember the day I decided to leave. My mother looked at me and told me that I was no longer her child. She refused to hug me and asked me to pack my things. Since then, I have never spoken to her again. There are no words to describe the pain of losing your family while you are still alive. Another shocking case is of a woman who, after being expelled, was left completely alone. I had no one. All my friends were Jehovah's Witnesses. My entire family was inside. One day, I had a life full of people, and the next, I was completely isolated. I had to learn how to live again. Isolation is not the only difficulty former members face. Many must also deal with a lack of education and job opportunities. As mentioned earlier, the organization discourages higher education, meaning that many people who leave the faith find themselves without the necessary tools to integrate into the workforce. A man who left the organization at 35 years old shared his experience. I spent my whole life believing that the end of the world could come at any moment. I never worried about studying or building a career. When I left, I realized that I had nothing, no degree, no profession, no network of contacts. It was terrifying to start from scratch. Fortunately, some managed to rebuild their lives after leaving the organization. There are support groups in different parts of the world formed by former Jehovah's Witnesses who help those going through the exit process. These groups offer psychological help, legal advice, and most importantly, a community that understands what they are going through. Many former members find a new purpose in these groups. They discover that there is life beyond the organization and that they can build meaningful relationships outside of it. However, the process is not easy and takes time. Another important factor is the reconstruction of identity. For someone who has grown up in the organization, leaving it means redefining who they are. Their identity had always been tied to being a Jehovah's Witness. Now, they must find a new purpose and a new sense of belonging. Some former members turn to other forms of spirituality, while others prefer to distance themselves from religion altogether. What they all have in common is the need to relearn how to live without the constant fear of divine punishment. Despite the challenges, many people who have left the organization say they have never felt more free. One man who spent 40 years as a Jehovah's Witness described his experience. "For the first time in my life, I can think for myself. I can read whatever I want, talk to whoever I want, and make my own decisions. It took me a long time to realize that I didn't need an organization to tell me how to live." However, the struggle of former members does not end when they leave. In many countries, Jehovah's Witnesses continue to be a powerful organization with great influence in their communities. Despite reports of cover-ups of abuse, ostracism, and social control, the organization continues to expand and attract new followers. Some governments have begun taking measures against certain practices of the organization. In Russia, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses have been banned and classified as an extremist organization. In other countries, fines have been imposed for failing to report child abuse cases. However, the fight for justice is far from over. Many of the organization's policies continue to harm thousands of people, and the fear of ostracism remains a powerful tool to keep followers inside. Despite everything, more and more people are starting to speak out about their experiences within the organization. Documentaries, interviews, and online forums have allowed former members to share their stories and warn others about the dangers of religious control. The question that arises is, to what extent should a religious organization have the right to regulate the lives of its members? Where is the line between faith and coercive control? Jehovah's Witnesses have been the subject of intense debates worldwide. For some, they represent a community of faith committed to morality and devotion to God. For others, they are a highly restrictive religious group that exerts absolute control over its members. But one thing is undeniable: their impact on the lives of those within the organization and those who have left is profound and lasting. Throughout this analysis, we have explored their history, beliefs, organizational structure, and the consequences faced by those who choose to leave. But one key question remains: what does the future hold for Jehovah's Witnesses in a world that is constantly changing? The organization faces several challenges today. The first and most obvious is access to information. For decades, Jehovah's Witnesses have strictly controlled what their members can read, watch, and listen to. However, in the digital age, this task has become increasingly difficult. The internet has allowed former members to share their experiences, internal documents from the organization to be published, and hidden practices to be exposed. Documentaries, social media testimonies, and online forums have cast doubt on many of the governing body's claims and have helped more people begin to question their faith. In response, the organization has issued increasingly aggressive warnings against apostate content. In their publications and speeches, the governing body insists that any critical information about Jehovah's Witnesses comes from Satan and that those who consume it are endangering their relationship with God. However, these warnings have not been enough to prevent thousands of members from researching on their own. Another significant challenge is legal scrutiny. In several countries, Jehovah's Witnesses have been the subject of investigations into their handling of child abuse cases and their practice of disfellowshipping. Some governments have begun to demand changes in their policies, and in some places, the organization has been sanctioned for refusing to report crimes to the authorities. In 2018, for example, the Dutch government conducted an investigation revealing that the organization had covered up numerous cases of child abuse. In Australia, a royal commission found that Jehovah's Witnesses had records of over 1,000 cases of abuse within their congregations, yet not a single one had been reported to the police. The growing public scrutiny has also affected the organization's image. In the past, Jehovah's Witnesses were primarily seen as a peculiar but harmless religious group. Today, many people associate them with ostracism, extreme control, and covered-up abuse scandals. However, despite these difficulties, the organization continues to operate and expand in some countries. Their ability to adapt to change has been key to their survival. In recent years, they have shifted their evangelism efforts to digital platforms, launching their own app and producing video content to attract new followers. But the question remains: can an organization with such strict rules and controversial policies survive in a world where information flows freely? Many former members believe that the organization's time is running out. They argue that younger generations are increasingly skeptical and that as more people dare to question their teachings, their number of followers will decline. Others, however, warn that the social control within the organization is so strong that it will continue to exist, although with a reduced number of followers. What is clear is that Jehovah's Witnesses will continue to generate debate. For some, they represent the only truth and the promise of eternal life. For others, they are an organization that instills fear and limits freedom of thought. Regardless of one's opinion, there is something we can all learn from this story: the power of critical thinking. We should never be afraid to question, investigate, and seek answers for ourselves. True spirituality should not be based on fear or coercion, but on the freedom to believe.